19th century replica of the Bayeux tapestry and a 14th century 1302 wax seal. This is the corporate seal of the City of London. So we'll start with this facsimile of the Bayeux tapestry. So just explain some of the jargon there. Facsimile is our word for a 19th century copy. Our word for a copy, and so this is a 19th century copy produced in 1821 of the Bayeux tapestry, which is of course famously a medieval document.
Transition?
Yes, thank you. And Simon, my colleague, is just going to put that up on the screen for us now. So we should at home now be seeing, we're about to see the image of our copy of the Bayeux tapestry. So we need to get some words out of the way, get some definitions out of the way as we start. So it's known to all of us as the Bayeux tapestry, but if we're being technical, we might want to call it an embroidery. So technically speaking, a tapestry is something that is woven, whereas the Bayeux tapestry, not to get too confusing, has a linen background with wool thread embroidered into it. So in the technical jargon of sort of textile history, we would call it an embroidery, but of course it's known to us all as the Bayeux tapestry, and I intend to call it the Bayeux tapestry throughout the rest of this talk because that's what it's known by. And indeed the reason it's probably called the tapestry rather than the embroidery is when it re-emerged as a sort of a popular item in the early 18th century, the French monk described it as the Bayeux tapisserie, and that's probably where the word comes from. So we'll talk a little bit about the original, and then we'll transition to talking a little bit about the facsimile that I have in front of me here. So we're dealing with nearly 1,000 years ago, so as you might imagine, we can't be sure of all the facts. So what I'm going to give, the origin story of the Bayeux tapestry that I'm going to give is the consensus view, is the orthodox view, but there are disputed accounts. There is scholarship which suggests different dates, different interpretations, different provenance. But we'll deal with the mainstream orthodox account today. But just be aware there is some consensus, there is some debate around that. So the orthodox view is that the Bayeux tapestry was produced in the 1070s. Commissioned by Bishop Odo, who was the half-brother of the famous William, Duke of Normandy, William the Conqueror, of course, William, King of England, later on. It was commissioned to both to celebrate the victory, but also to perhaps celebrate Odo's role in this as well. And it was likely produced in the 1070s and probably to coincide with the opening of Bayeux Cathedral in 1077. It's an interesting thing to categorise, it's an interesting thing to talk about. It's both a work of storytelling, a work of art, but also a piece of propaganda as well. The original tapestry is a truly ginormous thing. It is 50 centimetres sort of high or wide, but then it's nearly 70 metres long. So it's something, if you've perhaps been to Bayeux or the replica in Reading, something that takes a whole room to walk around. As I said, it tells the story of the death of Edward the Confessor and the battle for the succession of the Crown of England. In particular, the dispute between two very powerful men, Harold Godwinson, an English Earl, and William, Duke of Normandy. These men were known to each other, and the story tells that the tapestry tells the early part of that story. So we know that in the early 1060s, Harold either travelled to Normandy or shipwrecked in Normandy. The accounts slightly differ. He was either a guest or a hostage, again, it's hard to say, of William Normandy. But the two became close, they became sort of fellows in arms, and Harold accompanies William's campaign against his rivals, the Bretons. And as part of it, this fellowship is formed, and the account that the tapestry tells us, the Norman account of things, is as part of this, Harold swears an oath that he will respect William's claim to the throne of England following the death of Edward the Confessor, who was childless, and the claim that William states is likely based on William helping Edward out with some of the kind of civil and military politics of his reign. He was sort of an enforcer for hire, if that's not sort of too diminishing a way of putting it. So we have a very grand story told by the tapestry, starting with this backstory between William and Harold, takes in the death of Edward the Confessor, and then climaxes with the famous Battle of Hastings of 1066, where the succession to the throne of England is determined on the battlefield, which famously, of course, William wins, hence his sobriquet, the Conqueror. So that's the story of the tapestry. But what do we have here in front of us? What do we have here in our collections? Well, what we're seeing here is a 19th century replica. It's still very large. It's 20 metres long and 20 centimetres high. So it's a grand document. I don't think any of us have actually seen it in the work. You've seen it the whole way rolled out. We managed to roll it out partially for an event a few years ago, but it's too large for anyone to see the whole thing in one go. And it's the work of two people with this tapestry. I'm just going to check my notes to make sure I get the names right and get them the right way round. So it was the drawings were by one Charles Stothard, who was an antiquarian draftsman, which means this is a man who makes his living and makes his trade by drawing old buildings or monuments, things like that. These were popular things to collect. He'd go and draw them, and then they'd be replicated as part of the print trade. And so the drawings were done by Charles Stothard, and then we have we're not sure, we don't have a record, but judging by sort of examining the object, it might be engraved or it might be etched. So what that means is lines are either physically scoured or burnt into a metal plate with acid to form grooves, which ink can be put on, and then an image can be transferred onto paper in this case. And this object is then hand-coloured afterwards. So what was originally linen or thread has been reproduced in drawing and ink. The reason that it was produced is that at this time there was a real enjoyment in things antique, and it was produced for the Society of Antiquaries. It was a way to celebrate history, also to celebrate knowledge, and also the degree of sort of showing off and erudition and wealth that you could afford and make these sorts of things. And it came to the collection of London Metropolitan Archives via the Guildhall Library and Prints and Manuscript Department. So we talked a little bit about, a lot really, about the history of the tapestry and the object. What can we see? So the image that we can see, and the reason we've selected this to be part of the London Portrait City exhibition is from the part that you can see in front of me or on your screen. So this, as you may have guessed by now, is Westminster Abbey, or as it would be known then, the Church of St. Peter's. And and what we're seeing is the church, but we're also seeing the funeral procession of Edward the Confessor. So just off the one side, we're seeing, just off this side, we've seen Edward the Confessor has died, and he's been processed to his Abbey church on the 5th of January 1066. The story of Edward the Confessor is very much linked with the story of St. Peter's Church of Westminster Abbey. So Edward the Confessor is known as a pious man, as a pious king, but not known as a sort of effective king, as an effective ruler. And he was sort of forced out of his kingdom by marauding Danes, and he made an oath to the Pope that if he was to return to his kingdom, he would make a pilgrimage to St. Peter's in Rome. But he found when he was on the throne, he wasn't able to leave the subject for an extended period of time, and the Pope released him from the oath on the condition that he rebuild the Abbey of St. Peter's on a tenanted form of disrepair. He died shortly after the Abbey was completed, and he's buried there. The Abbey has since been extensively rebuilt, so the Abbey we can see here is not the Abbey that we see today. So this is what we call Romanesque or later Norman architecture, characterised by a kind of sense of weight and presence of the columns, and also many arches. It's very much a round arched form of architecture. And this image as I say, it's the oldest image in our collection, although it's not the oldest object in our collection, if that makes sense, because it's a later copy of an earlier image. There's a few other details that we just nice to point out before we have a look at our seal. We get a sense of how the tapestry is constructed. So there's a central narrative story going through the middle, sometimes called a cartoon, and then in the border there are, at this point these are some mythical beasts mainly for decoration, but actually at other points of this section on the top and the bottom we get introduced fables, so some Aesop's fables are written in there, and they're often on themes around oaths and loyalty and kingship, things like that. And there's also a bit of text as well. My Latin's not great, but roughly speaking, this translates as the body of the confessor is taken to St. Peter's Church. And these bits of text give us an indication of what's going on, but they're terse, they're laconic, and they cause much wailing and gnashing of teeth as God later, because we all want to know more. And there's a suggestion actually that the way the tapestry would be used is actually a storyteller or a troubadour would stand in front of it and expound on the details, and this was kind of their prompt, so these some anachronistic. You want to think of it as a very charming medieval PowerPoint presentation, if that's not too doing it down too much. And one final detail to point out is the rather charming hand of God appearing at the top of the image there. So this is hands are very important in Anglo-Saxon art, and this is the hand of God, and it's likely seen to be blessing William's conquest. People in this period believe greatly in providence, providence, tricky word, and I can't get too much of that, but a preordained plan by God, and this is, if you like, William's sign of divine blessing for his conquest. So I mentioned that this is a Romanesque or a Norman building. If we were to move to the object just to the right of this, so we have the next scene to this Simon. We are looking at a wax seal from the 14th century, not in the best condition, but in this slightly deteriorated wax seal, we can see an image of a Gothic cathedral. So this is the Cathedral of St. Paul's, and the wax seal that we see here is the corporate seal of the City of London. This particular incarnation of it dates from 1302, but the seal could have been in use from as early as 1189, and certainly we have records of it in use from 1219. Excuse me, 1190s. It probably was in use in 1219. We have the first record of it. There's a few elements that we can talk about here in terms of image making. Seals were before that. Let's just talk about what seals were used for. So seals were used to give formality and authenticity to official documents, kind of legal status as well. Something that survives in our language, give a seal of approval, that sort of thing. And the seals would both be unique to a person, a town, an office, but also be a way of advertising the virtues and the strengths of the way that body, corporate or human, wanted to be represented. So in this seal we have St. Paul, the patron saint of the City of London. He's depicted holding a sword. Frequently in hagiography and iconography, we see St. Paul depicted in that way. It's a symbol of his martyrdom because he was beheaded with a sword. We can also see the outline of churches and the outline of St. Paul's Cathedral. So these are both signs of piety and order, but also sort of wealth. And then it's surrounded by the walls. The City of London was famous for being a walled city. So this is also a sign of its strength and status. You can see all those images kind of tying together there in this seal. And you can't make out the legend because it's obviously survived only fragmentarily, but the legend says, and excuse me reading, my Latin is the best of time, Sigillium Baronum Londarium, which translates roughly as the seal of the barons, or the seal of the London citizens. We selected this seal to be part of the exhibition because it's a very early image of London, and also this particular, so we wanted to include a seal an early image of London, and as another kind of form of artistic visual culture. But also, this particular seal was kept because, believe it or not, it is in fairly good condition for something that's 700 and a bit years old. So you'll see that there's two colours, that there's a red and then there's a sort of browny orangey colour. The red is original, the orange is a later addition to protect it. This seal was made out of beeswax, and it's produced by creating a, think of it as a mould, but technically we might call it a matrix or a dye. Wax will be poured into this matrix, and then taken out, and you get your seal. The matrices were typically metal, but also bone and ivory matrices have been used as well. Seals survive in degrees of completeness. This is relatively speaking complete. Sometimes they're stored with the documents, as in this case. Sometimes they're stored separately from the documents, depending on how they survived and kind of conservation needs of the document. So taken together, these two items give an insight, an enigmatic insight into medieval London, the politics of the Norman conquest and battle of the Anglo-Saxons, but also a sense of how that city moves on in the medieval period, how it wants to see itself as a place of piety, strength, and power. So at that point, I'll finish the formal presentation. I'd like to just say that we have a curated tour of the exhibition tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Tickets you can find on Eventbrite, and also on the 8th of March we have the next in our series. I'll be looking at the case behind me, where we'll be talking about aquatints, and in particular the very important, interesting work by Pugin and Ransom in Microcosm of London. So thank you for joining us in person and online, and I'm now very happy to take any questions you might have. So you can pop them in the chat, or if anyone here has any questions, I'm happy to take them as well. So no questions so far, so thank you for your attention. Just give you another minute or two. I realise it can take a bit of time to get the brain going, get the fingers going, get them all lined up. So no rush, but if you do have questions, I'm very happy to answer them, or try and answer them, as the case may be. So whilst we're just waiting for questions, I should say that these two items aren't available to view online, so if you do want to see them, it's probably best to come in. But there is a full-size replica of the Bayeux tapestry at Reading Museum, so if you're based in the southeast of England, that can be an option. And there is talk, well, not talk, there are plans for the original Bayeux tapestry to come to London, come to England. I'm assuming London, but perhaps shouldn't do that. Come to England in the next few years as part of a renovation process at Bayeux Museum, where it's currently housed. So Simon, do we have any questions?
If you can please repeat the introduction, because there wasn't good sound.
Oh, sorry to hear that. So Simon just said, could I repeat the introduction because there wasn't a good sound. Do we know?
First 2 minutes.
First 2 minutes. So I will start talking, and then once it's covered the key ground, go from there. So in the introduction, I introduced the exhibition, which is London Portrait of a City. So this is our current exhibition in its sort of closing month, running until the 6th of April. In London Portrait of a City, we're looking at the various ways and images of London to be produced over the centuries, both in kind of traditional artistic mediums, drawing, illustration, printmaking, but also more widely speaking as well, taking in sort of town planning and maps and sound and video as well. And as part of this exhibition, we're going to be looking at individual items in this series of talks, and today we have been looking at a facsimile copy from the 19th century of the Bayeux tapestry and a 14th century seal from the City of London Corporation. It's their corporate seal. So we probably would have heard about the seal when the sound improved, but just to maybe introduce the tapestry again and our copy. So this is to say 19th century replica of a piece of work produced to kind of celebrate and tell the story of the Norman conquest. There is contention about exact details. It's a long time ago, and so these things get lost. But the orthodox view among scholars is that the tapestry was commissioned by the Bishop of Odo to celebrate Norman Conquest, and in particular celebrates his role as well. So Simon's giving the thumbs up that we're back to where we started. So my apologies for that problem with the sound. This is the second time we've done this, and in my experience, the second time you cook a recipe, the second time you do a talk, the second time you try a new tech, that's the one when it goes wrong. Even if you try and be as thorough as the first time, something always seems to creep in on the second time. So thank you for bearing with us with that fault. And if there are no more questions, Simon, then once again, thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you at another event like this very soon. Take care, everybody, and have a nice afternoon.